Surprise! The week of vaguely related two-parters limps on an extra day. This time we are going on from one retooled MMC IDW villain to another one, and this time it's that most hated of IDW bad guys, Getaway. And Getaway is the rarest of things, an Autobot villain, a truly loathsome bad guy from the faction of the good guys, and one that doesn't cleanly slot in with the Decepticons if they weren't with the Autobots, who I honestly think gets too much hate. Well, now he probably gets the appropriate amount, but I think initially people kind of thought his crimes were worse than they were. Like, most people seem to think he sold out Rodimus and all his friends to the DJD, but that's just a fake-out. At the end of the comic, it turned out that the people he sent to capture them all were the Black Box Consortia, who were supposed to not harm anyone but Megatron. The Decepticon Justice Division just kind of lucked out and found their way there first by accident. Of course, everyone hated him so much for that misconception and the legitimate horrible thing he did to Tailgate that they did write him after as being a much more abhorrent scumbag. But honestly, initially, I don't think he was supposed to be as miserably evil as people thought he was. He sure was after that, though. Oh, and before we get started, YouTube suppressed the last two of my videos, so if you didn't know about them, then just know that they didn't show the other MMC video I did on Friday to many people, and they suppressed the hell out of the 3,000 subscriber special, so those are available to watch. Also, remember how I did the test to see if asking people to subscribe at the start of the video really was 10 times more effective than not doing it? Yeah, that actually seems to be a real effect, because the second video where I asked people to subscribe had 28 subscriptions through that one. It's not as high as the other one, but that's still 7 times higher than the usual 4. I really don't want to bother you all by asking people to sub every video, so I'll see if I can't make it at least a little entertaining. But without further long-winded ado, MMC Getaway. This is a retool of the MMC Hot Rod, and you would be hard-pressed to realize that just looking at the robot mode, because they changed just about every inch of sculpted detail on this thing, to the point that you can see that even though the feet are the same part, they added an extra piece to substantially change the look. Apparently, the MMC Hot Rod is a figure that's been done dirty by its photography, because that always looked really puffy and heavy set from the outside, not like it should have, and it very much made me not want the figure. But having this in hand now, and it's a lot slimmer and sleeker looking than I expected. The chest is still probably a bit too puffy, but it's much less egregious than it looked, and this I have to say is a very striking figure. It could just be the paint job, but the eye is drawn right to this guy. I have a friend who's not really into the Transformers. He thinks they're cool enough, and he's usually interested in them when I show him my collection, but for the most part it's pretty passive. After I acquired this, when he walked in and looked at my collection for a second, his response within seconds of glancing at my shelves was, "Who is that guy? He looks so sick!" So yeah, this is a figure that draws attention with the pointy design and DBZ shoulder pads. He does not look like much else in the franchise. Even among IDW stuff, this is one of the most grab you by the eyeballs and hold you there designs. The tab slot in his chest is not the best look though. For a very small piece, it's shockingly effective at looking bad. I have no idea how his chest V is supposed to go. Is it supposed to be like this, or this, or this, or this? I think it looks best when they aren't pushed forward, and I prefer the narrow version of the V. The shoulder spikes are kind of annoying though. They are one of the more interesting parts of his design, but they don't really lock in. They just kind of hover there. They do a great job differentiating him from the Hot Rod, but they are a bit unsatisfying to handle. But if you don't like the look of them, good news. They are not a mandatory part of the transformation, and he also looks pretty cool without them. I don't know why, but I really feel like these wrist guards should have been like a set of Wolverine claws. Though this is not the kind of guy who would even use those, and I think the design would be better without these entirely, but you can't remove them. It is weird that they decided to represent his energy-conducting circuit lacing with a flat orange set of panel linings. I know that they'd be a pain to paint the way they're supposed to look, but I can't help but feel like orange just ain't it, Chief. So yeah, this thing looks great in its robot mode, though not as much like the character as you might think. This is absolutely a retool, but unlike the disappointing Rat Bat, it captures the spirit of the character so well that you kind of need to hold up the comic art side by side with this to actually notice the differences. I mean, the shoulder spikes are almost made up, and the chest V is actually supposed to loop around to his back, but none of that registers when you aren't looking directly at the panel. The only thing that really draws my ire is that he feels a bit too tall. This is a lanky mold, and Getaway was a squatter dude. Not a chunkster like Rufus, but this fast boy body type doesn't quite fit him. The head fits him great, but the body less so. It's definitely on point, unlike Rat Bat's off mug. It's amazing how little the comic did to his face to change him from what looked to be a good-natured bot to just pure evil. And this is clearly meant to capture the cruel nature that he came to be known for later. The one problem I have with this is the yellow paint they used for the faceplate and the accent colors. By the way, if you ask me what's the #1 feature I want to see more Cybertronians have, it's faceplates. Think about it. All of the coolest dudes have them. Optimus, Grimlock, Soundwave, Tarn. Find me a guy with a faceplate who doesn't look cool, and I'll find you a 3070 Ti that wasn't scalped. But yeah, my problem with this faceplate is that the paint they used is very thin and relatively clear, and it's pretty obvious that the plastic color is bleeding through the mask, so that looks pretty shitty. But the eyes are actually pretty glorious. They are made with an incredibly shiny metallic paint that reflects the light so brilliantly that when I was looking at this for the first time, I was holding it with its back to my computer screen, and the eyes were positively glowing, and there was no light source behind me when I'm looking at my monitor. So I thought it had light piping I was accidentally taking advantage of, and I was suddenly very disappointed until I went searching for the clear plastic on the back of his head, only to find none. Somehow, the light at the back of his head was wrapping around his dome and bouncing off of his eyes, because there's no light piping to be had. Someone care to explain how that physically works? Because right now, my working theory is that I am such a ghostly ass white person that I am reflective like a sheet of paper, and the light was bouncing off my face onto the figure's face and back into my own eyes. But yeah, real good head sculpt with some shockingly good eye paint and some really disappointing face paint. He comes with one accessory, and it's this gun. It's not his nudge gun, but it does have a detachable scope, and the tip comes off too, but I don't know why you'd want to do that. Posability here is a mixed bag. He has what feels like would probably be an above-average head, but it's so crowded by his collar, it really limits this more than it should. He does have a good amount of backwards tilt on it, and it's hinged so he can get some good head-pumping action. Shoulder pads are posable, so you can get some expression out of these, but they will fight you, because there's a lot of parts they will try to crash into. Same goes for his collar thingies. Shoulders can go out straight and be tricked for basically any amount more that you could want, and allow for some forwards and backwards butterfly. His elbows spin independently from his bicep and forearm, and has maximum bendage. Fists have spin and wiggle, but the arm guards are kinda in the way. Legs go forward and back just fine, but out to the sides is a bit of a problem because they are detented, and there are so few of them you have him either standing absurdly stiff or in a full-blown A stance because there is just nothing in between. Knees only bend to 90, and the feet are above average with tilt down, a little tilt up, an ankle rocker, and a heel down, but no swivel. So, this is a bit of a strange dichotomy. In the arms, he's well above average, but in general, there are a lot of joints just not living up to their potential because of issues with parts clashing into each other. The head feels like it should be great, but it's hampered by everything around it, and the legs are just in general below standard. He can cut plenty of cool poses, but he feels like he's just millimeters of clearance away from being amazingly articulated. Ultimately, instead, if you average his good and bad joints, he's just above average. Transformation on this is really bad. One of the big frustrations about it is actually the chest when going into robot mode. There are these minuscule pegs that have to lock into the shoulders, and they will not work unless you have the tires rotated properly. That is a weird bit of engineering to get used to. Going into car, and at least you don't have to deal with that. But even without that part being a problem, there is this weird and really unnatural operation to move his chest plate onto the backs of his ankles, where you gotta rotate it, and you don't have the space, while you are trying to snake it under something, and over something else, and the part is so thin it's kind of unnerving because it feels like you're gonna break it, and there's a reason why you probably never run into a step like this anywhere else. I mean, that's all clever and smart, but it's not fun, and the parts have to wrap around and slip under each other, and the back spikes that make up the spoiler are probably gonna fall off, and then there's this really clever bit with this sliding track, and then everything locks together so tightly, getting back into robot mode is a literal nightmare where you probably need a tool. I have never seen such a simple and clever transformation lead to such a lack of fun in the actual process. There is nothing hard to remember about this, nothing confusing. All of it works in interesting and unique ways that aren't hard to understand or figure out, but somehow they still end up difficult to do and frustrating in action. It's good in theory, good in execution, and yet somehow bad when you actually go to do it. And the end result is this pointy and jagged little Cybertronian mouse. I'm gonna be honest, I hate the look of this alt mode. It doesn't look like nothing, and that's the most I can give this. This is based on the Hot Rod, and this doesn't fit either of them in any way. There is nothing fast or sleek about it, it's far too wide, beefy, and goofy looking. It just feels like the god-awful tumbler from the Christopher Nolan Batman movies. And no, I am never going to call that piece of garbage the Batmobile. The Batmobile is cool. 2 videos in a row where I talk about Batman. All that said, outside the fact that it hurts to touch because just about every pointy edge of this figure ends up on the top of the vehicle mode, there is nothing objectively wrong with it. I mean, it doesn't look anything like what it's supposed to look like, but we basically never got to see that in the comics anyways. It's a little gappy maybe, but outside of what I'm now realizing is several issues, it's really to your taste if this alt mode works for you. For me though, no. The transformation is not enjoyable enough, and the alt mode is not worth the hassle. And that's pretty much a shame because the engineering wasn't bad or phoned in, it was good engineering, but that still resulted in a joyless process. So this is a pretty mixed bag if you ask me. Hey, for once my rating for the figure is dead clear. One half of the figure is great. Basically everything dealing with the robot mode is above average. Sure, it's not accurate to the look it's supposed to have, but it does look like the look it's supposed to have, and the posing is above average. But the transformation is a chore, and I don't think the alt mode is worth that grinding pain. But you may differ on that front. Also, it doesn't look the way it's supposed to, but I'd argue that's actually a big negative this time at least. If you want an IDW-inspired getaway, this is probably going to be our lot, possibly forever, unless a fan with a 3D printer wants to fix that. And inspired is the key word. This is an IDW-inspired version of the character, not a true representation of them. In that context of what its role is, it satisfies. It's not something worth avoiding, but it's only worth buying to the right people. And that's not half of what I have to say, but it's enough of what I have to say. And I know, you know, what everyone else tells you to do at the end of these videos. So, if you liked what you saw here, please do that. And if you'd like to take it a step further, then please, share this video with any friend you think may be interested. I hope you all enjoyed listening to me waste your time.